afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another astounding session of ENG4E. That's grade 12 workplace preparation English, brought to you by Wausau Distance Education Center. I am your instructor, Mike Laverty, and today's date is Thursday, April the 6th. And today's class marks class number 31 of our time together. And so we have 34 classes in total. So including today, we only have 4 more classes to go. And we've been doing a novel study this week. So what I did was I chose 3 chapters of our novel, Where the Rivers Meet. And I chose 4 chapters that we could look at together, and those were chapters 3, 8, 12, and 15. And so, just if you go back, you can watch them yourself, and I strongly encourage that you do so to gain a greater understanding of this book. So, in chapter 3. Nancy is she has like a very intense interaction with the store owner, Simon Krebs, and then afterwards she has a talk with Barry, and and then he sort of walks her through it, and he's a very good friend for her. And you can see how they are close. I think she's closer with George, but she's also, Barry's a good friend of hers. So, she works through a lot of her problems with Barry. She explains the incident that happened in the store. We looked at chapter 8, which is Nancy dealing with the loss of this friend Barry. Dealing with the grief of losing him, and just feeling completely lost and not knowing what to do, and then her father asking her to go talk to Mrs. Schmidt. And then yesterday's chapter 12 was is Nancy living out in the forest by herself, and she's fasting, and she's exercising, and she's away from other people, and she's trying to heal herself. And then at the end of chapter 12, she feels, she doesn't feel that she's done. She is done. The set amount of time that Mrs. Schmidt and Nancy had agreed upon has come and gone, and Nancy had wanted to go home several times, but she didn't. She stuck through. And then now we're going to look at chapter 15, which is the second last chapter of the book, where Nancy's desire to change her community and to stand up for what she believes is right sort of really, it does. It comes together, and she, now that she's kind of, I wouldn't say that Nancy has healed herself. It's not like she's all better and everything's going to be fantastic for her in the future. A lot of her problems are still there. She still has a lot to do. It's not like she just went to the woods for 30 days and now she's healed. But I think she's much better than she was, and she's in a mental state and a physical state where she can at least try, and she can at least try to get herself out there and try to change her community as best she can. So I'll be reading some selected passages from that chapter, and then we'll look at that through the elements of narrative. All right, so this is week 8 in term 2A. Got a couple of announcements. So the Wausau office is closed tomorrow. That's Friday, April 7th, 2023. So that's Good Friday. We are not operating on Good Friday. Our office will be closed in about 45 minutes, actually. And we'll also be closed on Monday. So that's Easter Monday. So it's a 4-day weekend. So and that might be the case in your community. Your learning center may be shut down, so staff will be unavailable until Tuesday, April 11th, to answer any questions you may have. And Tuesday, April 11th is the deadline to register for Term 2B, the final term of this school year. And June 15th, very important deadline. That's our graduation date. And if you are approaching graduation, that's a really important date for you to keep in mind. So just know that you can't submit work after that point. If you want to get your credit, if you've been putting in work for an assignment, then you need to submit that work before that date. And you have to, and then you have to write your final exam. So you have to do all of that to get your credit, right? So you have to have that done before that date, and all the work you put in this year, you don't want to go to waste, because when the school year starts next year, you've got to start from scratch. So basically you've got about 2 months to go. Realistically, you've got about 2 months to go, and that's enough time to finish a course, and probably not much more for anything else, but that's certainly enough time for you to finish this credit and maybe any other courses you're working on. So with that in mind, we'll have a look at our course schedule. So we took care of units 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we are now finishing off our novel study. And then next week we will have 3 classes together. So that'll be Tuesday the 11th, Wednesday the 12th, and Thursday the 13th. And all of these classes will be intended to prepare you for the final exam. And there will be questions about the novel on the final exam. So these classes are intended to, these classes in the novel study, they're also intended to prepare you for the final exam. All right, so yeah, thank you for tuning in if you're listening to us live on 91.9 FM or Bell ExpressVu channel 972. Please note you can always phone the studio at 1-800-465-7144. That's our toll-free number. Or you can phone 1-807-737-4017. And you can participate live as well on Zoom. So if you open up the Zoom app, or if you go to zoom.us, it'll ask you to join a meeting. And my meeting ID is 417-6699-799. You can reach out to me directly through email. That's mlaverty@nnecschools.org. Find me on Facebook or Messenger. My professional Facebook page is Laverty Wassa. So we can talk on there. You can submit assignments to me. You can ask me questions. So you can phone the Wassa office at 1-807-737-1488, extension 2211, or phone us toll free at 1-800-667-3703. Please do that if you think you're getting close to graduating, or if you're having any questions about taking courses in Term 2B, or any questions about your path to graduation, because that's what it's all about. Even if you've just started, even if you've only taken a couple of courses, right? Even if this is your first course, it is all leading towards you graduating, and we have lots of staff here at Wassa whose job it is to help guide you through that process. All right, so with that in mind, let's have a look at today's lesson. We'll start with some quotes of the day. So on the 4th day of the week, I like to put up usually some inspirational quotes that help us understand the course material, help us understand the novel, help us to get some inspiration for our own writing projects. That's what it's all about, just seeing what other people have done and getting inspiration from them. And then we'll, of course, continue our novel study, as I mentioned, chapter 15. We'll review the elements of narrative, so that's characters, setting, plot. Characters, setting, plot, conflict, and theme are the 5 elements we'll look at. As we look at, no, not, I forgot to change that, chapter 15. We'll have a look at the key questions from Unit 2. So again, Unit 2 of this course deals almost exclusively with the novel. Most of the questions from that unit deal with where the rivers meet. So it's these 4 courses from this week are really helpful for finishing off Unit 2. And your success criteria are to gain a deeper understanding of our novel and to make even more connections within the text and to your own life. So when you read a novel and you go back and you reread the chapter, which I would encourage you to do, right? So that's what I encourage students to do when they're assigned a novel for an English class. It's you usually just read right off the bat just to understand what happened in the story. And then when you go back and you answer questions and you write essays about it, then it's important to just go back and reread. And you don't have to reread the entire thing, but you just read selected chapters and just try to go beyond what happened, right? And then start asking why it happened and what deeper meanings and what deeper truths can I get from this book. And then we will practice ways of analyzing a text by looking at its format, its organization, its content, and sharing your insights, because that's what this course is really all about, just looking at different kinds of texts and seeing how they're organized, how they're laid out, what's in them, that kind of thing. And then sharing your insights about them. So here's a couple of quotes. So George Carlin, that's one of the greatest comedians of all time. You should look him up on YouTube. Great stand-up material. He says the caterpillar does all the work, but the butterfly gets all the publicity, right? So that's really important for today's chapter, as our main character Nancy is staging a protest of sort and getting her case out to the media. An American writer, Charles Bukowski, says, I guess the only time most people think about injustice is when it happens to them. So I love that quote. So it's very true. It's sad but true that most people, if they never experience injustice, they simply won't think about it. But, of course, Nancy has experienced her share of injustice, and she definitely thinks about it. And more importantly, she wants to do something about it. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I'm probably mangling that Russian last name, but he's a very famous, not sure if he's Ukrainian or if he's Russian, but he wrote a lot about injustice, and he's quoted as saying, in keeping silent about evil, in burying it so deep within us that no sign of it appears on the surface, we are implanting it, and it will rise up 1,000-fold in the future. When we neither punish nor reproach evildoers, we are not simply protecting their trivial old age. We are thereby ripping the foundations of justice from beneath new generations. And so I think that that's kind of one of the important things about Nancy's journey, is that she's trying to make her life better, and she's trying to transform herself so she can be happier and she can live a fuller life. But I think to Nancy's credit, she's also trying to make life better for other people. She's also trying to make life better for her community. And as we look at the chapter 15, I think she's trying to make life better for people in the future, right? She's not just thinking about the high school students going to school in her time. She's thinking about 20 years, 40 years from now, right? And into the future, right? She wants to make life better for future generations. So in Unit 2, one of the key questions, it's a series of guided reading questions about specific chapters. And this one has 4 of them. And number 43 is, what are 3 things the protesting students want to see put in place at their high school. 44, what is Nancy's purpose in contacting the media, TV, radio, and newspaper during this time? Toward the end of the chapter, Nancy's father speaks up before the large group of people gathered on the powwow grounds. What surprising idea does he share with everybody? What is Nancy's reaction? Does Mr. Dworkin, the superintendent, support this idea? All right. So, oh yeah, and then also you have to do your chapter reflections, right? So you've got to pick 6 chapters. So I'm hoping that this discussion might inspire you to write about chapter 15, or what I'm doing here is just demonstrating how you can reflect upon a chapter. And then, so when you reflect upon the chapter, you don't have to make a specific argument about the chapter. It's not like a mini essay. It's just simply that. It's just, I've read this chapter. This chapter makes me think about this, right? So you're either making a connection with your own life, making a connection with a movie you've seen. Maybe this novel reminds you of your high school experience, right? So you're just basically taking some aspect of this chapter, the part that speaks to you, and just write about it. And you could also write about a specific element of narrative. So write about the plot, the characters, the setting, the theme, the conflict, to somehow focus your thoughts, right? So just, you could just simply provide a plot summary and then provide your own thoughts to it, or maybe talk about the deeper themes and that are emerging, and or talk about the conflict. All right, so with that in mind, I will start to read from this novel. Okay, so this is page 131 of the novel, chapter 15. The corral became strike headquarters. The next day, the students circulated in and out, filling up the tables with Coke cans and discussing their plans. After the initial rush of the walkout, the cold reality of what they had done began to sink in. About a third of the students had not walked out. They told the strikers that Patterson had called them together in the gym and told them that unless the others returned by the end of the week, the strikers would all lose credit for the year, and those in grade 12 would not graduate. So remember that in the previous chapters, chapter 12, Nancy's back. She's done her fasting. She's done her time out in nature. And then chapters 13 and 14 is her returning to school, and she's really fired up, and school seems even more meaningless to her. And then this sort of all culminates with her staging a walkout and convincing a bunch of her friends and the school itself to walk out of the classroom and to try and get the attention of the school board and to fight for what they think is right in terms of the kind of education they think they deserve and need. And so the principal, Patterson, has made this announcement saying that anybody who participates is in trouble, and these grade 12 students, Nancy included, is really in trouble because they won't graduate and they won't get their credit. Can he do that? Asked Roger Charlie, who was hoping to go on into a fisheries program in the fall. Nah, I don't think so, assured Jacob. He's just trying to bluff us. But there was a note of uncertainty in his voice, and Nancy could see the worry growing in Roger's eyes. What exactly are we striking for? Asked Charlotte Adams. I mean, don't people always have definite demands when they strike? We should demand they start an Indian studies program, someone's called out. What does that mean? Bobby McKay demanded. Traditional stuff like hide tanning and basket making, spirituality, or things about what it's like to be an Indian now and what skills we need today? I don't know. Maybe some of both. Why bother? They'll just teach it like they teach all the other courses. I think we need a Shuswap language program. Well, listen, we got to learn the stuff. We need so we can make it outside too. Like what? Math, English, that kind of thing. But it's more important that we learn what we need here in this community. This is where we live. All I know, Lita Adams said quietly, is that if you come out feeling crummy about yourself at the end, and it doesn't matter what they've taught us. Yeah, and you got to learn how to think, not just copy notes off the board. But look, broke in Roger, we need programs that are going to get us to ready to take vocational courses so we can get jobs. What about stuff you need for university? I want to be a teacher. The most important thing to me, Big John Joseph said slowly, is to learn what it means to be Indian. I want to feel good about me and being Indian. There was a long pause. Geez, this isn't going to be easy, muttered Lita, who had taken out a piece of paper to jot down their demands. All right, so it's good to note the characters. You've got Nancy and several classmates, right? So it's her and several of her classmates, and they are, the plot is, they're meeting at the corral, which is like the place where it's like the student hangout. It's where they all gather together, and it's interesting to note that a corral is an interesting choice for this because it's a very much like a symbol of like colonialism and sort of like white culture. It's like this old rustic western like cowboys, you know, um, it's that cowboy kind of Wild West sort of like atmosphere. So to have like a whole bunch of indigenous students take over a space like that and turn it into their headquarters where they plan is it's pretty symbolic. So Nancy looked around the circle of discouraged faces. Why should it be easy? She said. We're all different and we have different ideas about what schools should be and what we need. Why should we agree any more than anybody else? We can't hassle all this out now. But one thing is clear, we need to get to the people who can make changes. We need to have a showdown with the school board and the superintendent. We've got to get them here and listen to us. Patterson will never change. We've got to go over his head. So how will we do that? Somebody's got to call the superintendent, I guess. Well, who's going to call? Everyone looked at Nancy. Why me? She asked. I'm not any leader. Maybe not, but since you've come back, you're different, said Cyril Narcissus. You can say things we think but are afraid to say. You do it. So, Nancy walked to the payphone in the corner and dialed the school board office. She asked for Harry Dworkin, the superintendent, and after several minutes he finally came on the other end. Mrs. Dworkin, Mr. Dworkin, Nancy began. I am one of your students here in Creighton who walked out. I guess you've heard about that. You must be Nancy Antoine, Dworkin replied. Yes, Mr. Patterson informed me that there was some problem. Well, it's more than some problem. It's a lot of problems, and we would like to talk to you about our complaints and see if we can make things better here. The phone seemed to go dead for a moment, as if the superintendent had put his hand over the receiver. She could hear muffled voices, but couldn't make out what was being said. Finally, he came back on the line. Yes, well, Miss Antoine, I'm not in the habit of negotiating with students. I'm afraid that you're dealing with the wrong person. My advice is to go back to the class and take up your complaints with the administration of your school. Mr. Patterson is a reasonable man. But, Mr. Dworkin, I'm sorry, Nancy. That's my final word. I think it's only fair of me to remind you that all of you who continue to stay away from classes are jeopardizing your year. I might also mention that disciplinary action, including dismissal, may be considered for those who do not attend classes. He paused for effect, and especially those who seem to be encouraging this behavior. You think about it, Miss Antoine. The phone went dead in her hand. She slowly put it back on the hook and returned to the students who were looking expectantly at her. Well? Cyril asked. Nancy looked around. Time was obviously against them. The school could simply sit back and wait. One by one, the students would drift back and the strike would collapse with nothing gained and people feeling even more powerless than before. And this is where Nancy gets her big idea. She's talking about the media. First of all, we've got to get the press here, TV and radio and newspapers. Then we have to get the parents, the community on our side. We have to explain why we've walked out. We'll make so much noise they can't ignore us. People smiled and cheered with relief. Finally, there was a focus. There was something to do. All right, so we've got the meeting at the corral, and the students are they start off the chapter by discussing discussing their demands, but they are unfocused, and there's many things that they want, and they're not really sure how to sort of figure out what they want to do. And then, of course, Nancy phones. Let's see. She phones Mr. Dworkin, the superintendent, and then she sort of gets the media involved. And then it looks like you've got this character named Lonnie, and he seems to be on the side of the administration. He comes down to the corral, and he's been sent there as like a peace broker. He's been sent there to, maybe convince these people to go back to school. And he walked up to the crowd of students, and he cleared his throat nervously. "Hey, I heard there was a little trouble, so I hurried right on down here to see if I could, help work things out." "Whose side are you on?" Cyril asked, punching a straw through a styrofoam cup. "Did Patterson send you?" "Hey, we're all on the same side here, right? We all want you guys to get a good education. I'm just here to help patch up the misunderstandings and get you guys back in school where you belong. Listen, I've been working on this, and I think I've got Mr. Patterson ready to meet with you guys if you'll come back. Hey, I can't guarantee anything, but maybe we can even get him to agree to a Native Studies program. What do you think about that?" There was no response, and Cyril kept poking holes in a cup. And then they basically just dismiss him. "Go on, Lonnie," Cyril continued. "We got work to do. And tell Patterson that we'll talk about coming back after we meet with the school board and superintendent, not before." Lonnie's smile faded and his face became sullen and hard. "What do you guys think? Who do you guys think you are? Who are you to demand anything? I'm going to give you a piece of advice, and you better listen good. If I were you, I'd get back in that school fast. Right now, they're still not too mad. They may let you back in, but if you continue this stupid little protest much longer, you're in big trouble." Big John Joseph stood up and began working towards Lonnie, his thumbs hooked on his belt. "You better go now," he said, moving forward threateningly. Lonnie took a step back. Okay. Have it your way. Throw away your education. But you haven't seen anything yet. This is going to get nasty." He gave a dark sneer. "You guys are pathetic. You actually think you can bring the school down?" He stalked away, giving the door a vicious shove on the way out. There was an uncomfortable silence after he left. "Maybe he's right," somebody muttered. "Maybe we're just kidding ourselves." "Maybe he is right," Nancy said quietly. "I don't know what we can do either, but we haven't even tried yet. Do you want to give up now and slink back to school?" And the general consensus around the room is that they don't want to go back to school. They do want to see this thing through. Let's see, we've got Nancy phones Mr. Dworkin. You've got the confrontation with Lonnie. And so after that, this is when Nancy starts to get active. She starts to get moving on things, and then she calls the local TV station and asks for the news director. And then they respond by saying, "We'll have a camera crew out there in an hour." That night, Nancy watched herself on TV for the first time, explained the situation to the newswoman. The interview had been conducted in front of the corral, and behind the cafe's logo, the bronc rider bouncing above his horse was painted on the glass. On television, it looked like the cowboy was putting his hat on Nancy's head. Next time, she thought, we'll do our interview somewhere else. She was sitting at George's with a group of other strikers. "How do you think I did?" Nancy asked anxiously. "Great," George said, "except your zipper was down on your jeans." Nancy's eyes grew wide. "It was not, was it?" Everybody laughed, and Nancy batted George playfully on the shoulder. Geez, George, that's nasty. Is that all the coverage we get? Someone said. What's going to happen now? The next morning, the town was crawling with news people who sensed a larger issue. 4 newspapers, 2 radio stations, and 3 television stations, including the CBC, had reporters combing Creighton for anyone involved in the walkout. And so, yeah, so they're getting the attention that they have sought after, and that's typically what happens in these cases. As soon as one media outlet picks up on the story gets out there, and then larger ones pick up on it, and they don't want to miss out. They want to get in there, and they want to share their stories, right? So, so another big plot point is Nancy goes on TV, and that leads to media visiting Creighton, right? So they got the attention of the local news, and then once they had the attention of the local news, these other like regional and national organizations like CBC are now coming out to see what's happening. Okay. And then at one point after Nancy has done a bunch of interviews and they've asked about their demands, Nancy walked over to the counter and Leo handed her the phone. Listen, he said, I don't mind you turning my restaurant. So this is the owner of the corral. I don't mind you turning my restaurant into an office, but if you're gonna start taking calls here, how about having a business line put in over there in the corner? Nancy put the phone to her ear. Hello? Miss Antone, this is Mrs. Loretta Lewis. I am Mr. Dworkin's secretary. She had the same cold, efficient voice that Donut had. Nancy wondered if they learned that in secretarial school. Yes. I'm calling to arrange a meeting. Mr. Dworkin will meet with you and a small group of students, no more than 5, in the principal's office at Creighton High at 8:30 tonight. Nancy thought quickly. Tell Mr. Dworkin that we're pleased he's agreed to meet with us. And that time is fine, but we'll only meet if whoever is intended. We'll only meet if whoever is interested can come. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. And if we'll meet at the powwow grounds next to the band hall. What seemed like minutes, Mrs. Lewis came back on. Her voice seemed even colder than before. Very well, Miss Antone. 8:30 at the powwow grounds. Nancy exhaled in relief. Good. Oh, and we want the school board members there as well. Anything else, Miss Antone? The secretary said icily. No, that should be fine. She hung up the phone and rushed back to the waiting students. We've got some new planning to do, she said simply. The meeting's on for tonight. By 8:15, Nancy guessed that at least 200 people had gathered at the powwow grounds. The student teams had fanned out through the community, revisiting each house on the reserve to tell them about the meeting. Now, more and more people crowded into the clearing. Roger Charlie had brought a truckload of firewood that afternoon, and they had built a fire pit. They had built a fire in the fire pit. The blaze crackled noisily in the center of the circle. Nancy watched the people. They were old women, bandanas tied around their heads, young moms with 2 or 3 kids in tow, older kids running and laughing, dogs barking at their heels, men in jean jackets and worn cowboy boots. She saw George talking with a group of workers from the mill. Then, walking down the dirt road in front of the band hall, she saw a big man walking with long strides. Beside him, dwarfed by his size, was an older woman who walked with surprising spring and determination. It was her father and Mrs. Schmidt. Nancy ran to them and hugged them both. I didn't think you'd come, she said, smiling with delight. You kiddin'? Asked Mrs. Schmidt. I wouldn't miss this for the world. Besides, teachers always like to see their students show what they've just learned. And then, of course, she means herself as a teacher, right? And then, okay, so this is sort of like the big showdown of the book. You've got, this is I'm going to call it the big showdown, with the superintendent. And then Nancy, this is when Nancy is addressing the crowd. As you know, she said quietly, As you know, most of the Indian students and some of the white students walked out of the school 3 days ago. We asked Mr. Dworkin, the superintendent, and the school board members, she waved at the men and women who had come in the cars and were now sitting uncomfortably on the grass, to come and discuss our complaints. We hope everybody will have a chance to say what they think, and maybe together we can find some solutions. Um, I don't have a degree from a university, but I have spent a long time in school. I know that there are ways to teach and learn that your teachers are not taught. There are goals and needs that you do not understand. There is information we need and skills that are not taught in your classrooms, and there are places to learn outside of your schools, and we have to find and use them. Mr. Dworkin, yes, well, thank you, Nancy, and I want to assure you that we are always open to suggestions and ideas for improving our schools. However, I want to explain to you people the situation we're in. You see, our hands are really tied. You people behind me might want to shift over here so you can see this. And so he's just obsessed with his requirements for graduation, and it doesn't see that he's really interested in talking. And this is, one of the biggest moments of the novel, of this chapter, is when Nancy's father, he rushes over and he makes a speech. And this is important because we've seen in previous chapters in the novel where Nancy has been kind of disappointed in her father and seeing him not take charge and not sort of speak against injustice. But then he tells a story that he heard from his father about his great grandfather and about a vision quest that he went on. And it reads as follows. One morning, while he was on his quest, he had gone out to pick berries. It was early and the mists were rising off the river. A bear, a grizzly bear, came out of the mist like a spirit. It moved slowly toward him, shuffling. Now her father moved into the center of the circle, and the fire played on his long hair and great shoulders. He was frightened and wanted to run, but he couldn't. Slowly the big bear came toward him, sniffing the air. Her father's voice seemed to take on a growl, and he swayed slightly from side to side. His shadow flickered and danced, huge and bear-like in the half-light of the fire. She came to him, and he could see the white tips of her thick hair, the deep black of her nose, the shiny black stones of her eyes. She sniffed his hand, then gently licked the berries from the basket he'd left on the ground. Her pink tongue lifted the red berries into her mouth. That bear finished and walked back into the trees, but before she did, she looked at my great-grandfather and told him that she would always be there to help him, to guide him, to give him strength when he needed it. And when he went to his basket, there was a single bear's tooth lying at the bottom. And then Nancy felt the tooth, the one that hung around her neck. But you see, her father's voice seemed to soften, I'd forgotten that story. You and your schools tore those stories out of me. You tried to kill the stories and their strength and leave me empty. And it worked, too. But now I'm beginning to remember, and I won't forget again. And now some of our children are beginning to look for those stories and for that strength, and it's not just in schools. Your schools leave them feeling empty and weak, just like they did to me. Mr. Dworkin, you say you can't make room for us, our lives, our history, our stories, our future in your schools. If that's true, Mr. Dworkin, then we have no choice but to make a school of our own. Now people started to come forward, and then once he's sort of that's, I guess, like to use a phrase from our time, that's the mic drop moment. That's when he brings up that idea of them having their own school. And a mother holding a sleeping baby on her shoulder stood up behind Dworkin. Your schools are not like our homes, Mr. Dworkin. We consider our children people, free to explore on their own. We don't force our kids to learn at a certain time in a certain way. They show us what they've learned and when they're ready to, not when we demand it. Our children are not used to having one person control their world. They're not used to being told what to do and how long they have to do it. Speaker after speaker talked about their anger, their frustration. Old people spoke about residential schools. Why, do you know, one woman said, we were even told how many squares of toilet paper we could use. 2. She raised 2 fingers for emphasis. The first time I met the brother, another related, he pulled out a big black leather strap and told me, if I ever hear that you're speaking Shuswap, you'll get this over your hand. And he did it too. And so a bunch of people join in. They're each on the mic. There was a pause that stretched for a minute or two. Then Dworkin, who had remained the whole time, wheeling to face speaker after speaker, ran his hands through his hair. He cleared his throat. I really don't know what to say, he stammered. Then he paused again. One thing seems perfectly clear, however. We have been running our schools our way, and you people have been left out. He cleared his throat again. We have made many mistakes for you. Maybe it's time that you had a chance to make your own change. If you wish to start your own school, I will not oppose it. There was a hush, then someone clapped, and then the applause tore through the crowd. People began to cheer and laugh, and Dworkin stood smiling wearily in the middle. Somebody was shaking Nancy's hand. It looks like we've won. Nancy nodded and made her way through the crowd. She found her father sitting quietly outside the circle. She rushed to him and hugged him. He started to put his big arms around her, hesitated, then clasped her close to him, laughing as she buried her face in his shoulder and wrapped her slender arms around his neck. I'm so proud of you, Pop, Nancy whispered. You were great. Thanks. Her father unlocked his arms and looked shyly at his daughter. I felt kind of foolish at first, but then it was as if someone else was telling the story. It seemed to come from way deep inside. Nancy hugged him again and handed him something she'd been squeezing in her fist. It was the bare tooth hanging from the thong. It glinted red in the firelight. Thanks for lending this to me, Pop, she said softly, but it belongs to you. She took it from his hand and slipped it over his head. And so that is sort of like the defining moment of the novel. It's the big showdown, and the chapters that follow. The one chapter, chapter 16, that follows afterwards is sort of like the what we call the denouement, the closing action. It's sort of like the as the credits are rolling in the movie, so to speak, right? So you've seen Nancy's progression. You've seen her heal herself, and she's also been able to heal. She's been able to heal other people too, right? So she's having a positive influence on her father, right? And maybe her father, wouldn't have the courage to do what he did had he not seen the transformation that Nancy has undertaken through her spirit quest, right? So he's sort of lost, but he's learning from his own daughter's experience, and he's being inspired by what she has done. So that's that's really a beautiful thing to see, right? To see, and then you're seeing like a role reversal, right? Where where the father is trying to support the daughter and trying to lift her up, and then the unexpected has happened where the daughter has lifted the son up, right? So Nancy's father makes a speech, others make speeches, and then of course at the conclusion Dworkin says he will build a school, or not that he'll build it. That says that he says that he, let's see, he is okay, with the school, right? And then this is this story, or this novel, it's not based upon one true experience, but it is based upon what has happened, or what did happen in the 80s in British Columbia. And from what I could read just by doing some initial research on this, is that there were um, there were some very big changes to the way education was delivered in British Columbia, and then the Department of Education, or the Ministry of Education in British Columbia, was beginning to be open to this idea that you could have Indigenous led high schools, and having school boards that are led by Indigenous people. And yeah, so that sort of speaks true to what actually happened in British Columbia. So I think that's sort of like, maybe I'll just close on this point, the point about the conflict, right? So I think that Nancy, um, in like the previous chapter, I'd said the number one conflict was Nancy with herself. But I'd say the number one concept here, or the number one conflict, is Nancy versus society. And I guess let's make it specific, kind of white society, right? That's probably the number one conflict. That's or we could say, Nancy versus, the injustice of the world. Right? So these are the main conflicts that are unfolding in this novel. They're the main difficulties that Nancy has to face, and those conflicts. So conflict and theme are really closely related, and same with plot. So just before we close today, I'll give some final notes on that. Right. So the plot of a novel is what happens, but the plot of the novel is driven by a conflict, right? It just simply can't be a bunch of random stuff that happens. The reader's not going to care. It's not going to make for a very interesting or compelling story. The kind that you just don't want to put down. There's got to be some kind of conflict here, and the conflict that drives our plot is Nancy's internal struggle and her conflict that she wants to stay in Creighton, she wants to stay in her home reserve, and make it better, but she also wants to kind of run away and she wants to make a fresh start somewhere. So she's got those two very different conflicts kind of raging inside her mind. And then that, of course, leads to the deeper meaning of the story, the deeper meaning of our plot, which, I would argue is that whole idea of transformation and changing who you are, and changing the world, right? So just thinking about, how you change the world, how the world changes you. And yeah, it's about that dual sense of the word transformation, right? So I think that's a really important word to keep in mind. So transformation, and this is like how you, or how Nancy changes the world. And how it changes you. And then maybe one final point, just kind of calling back to that quote I have on the board, the George Carlin quote. The caterpillar puts all the work in. So Nancy was the caterpillar. She went through all her struggles, and the butterfly is the one that gets all the publicity, right? So, but that's okay, because she put the work in and she deserved it. But I would argue by the end of this novel, she has transformed quite significantly. So that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you have an awesome long weekend. We will meet back on Tuesday, April 11th, and we will continue our preparation for your final exam.